Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the flickering light of a medieval castle's bedchamber, where the air smells faintly of tallow smoke and damp stone. You lie beneath heavy woolen blankets, a single candle sputtering on the iron sconce above you, while the draft sneaks in through arrow-slit windows no matter how many tapestries your servants have hung. This is no fairy tale palace, no golden spires gleaming in the sun. It's a fortress equal parts home and defense tower. And you, unlucky soul, are its most precious and most trapped resident, a medieval princess. And before you start daydreaming about tiaras and unicorn rides, let's be real, you probably wouldn't survive the first week of this life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is. Because right now, in this castle we're sneaking into, the bells have just struck dawn. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the muffled shuffle of servants creeping across the rush-strewn floor. Their footsteps are softened by bundles of reeds, herbs, and straw scattered to keep the damp at bay. Though after a week they start smelling suspiciously like wet dog. Above your bed, the ceiling beams are blackened with soot from winters past, when fires smoked instead of warming. The air clings to your skin in a way that no lavender pouch can cover. And before you can even wiggle your toes, someone is already pulling back your covers. Because privacy, dear princess, is a luxury for peasants. Your chamber isn't the bright, airy bedroom of a Disney film. It's closer to a stone cave with a few luxury upgrades. Thick walls meant to stop catapult stones, trap the cold as efficiently as they block invaders. Glass windows exist, yes, but they're expensive, fragile, and sometimes smaller than your face. More often you're looking through oiled parchment, dim and yellow, like staring through wax paper. Forget about gazing dreamily at the stars from your window ledge. You're more likely squinting at a pale blur. Still as miserable as the draft can be, your room is a signal of your importance. Ordinary folks sleep on straw pallets beside their goats. You, by contrast, have a feather mattress and fur blankets that shed their own musky smell. And don't underestimate the symbolism of those wall hangings. Tapestries woven with mythical beasts and family crests. They aren't just decoration. They're Instagram posts of the medieval world, broadcasting your dynasty's wealth and reminding visitors that you belong to a house with more power than their entire village combined. But let's pause and drop a mainstream fact in here. Castles weren't designed with comfort as the first priority. They were war machines, layered with defenses, moats, portcullises, murder holes, all intended to keep you alive during a siege. Your bedroom is literally wedged inside that military structure. Every stone block is a reminder that your life is constantly under threat. Historians still argue whether young royals actually understood just how precarious their positions were, or if the pageantry of daily ritual blinded them to the looming violence outside. Of course, daily life has its smaller battles too. The first is warmth. Imagine trying to sleep when your breath fogs in the room. The hearth at the far wall barely manages to heat the space, and unless a servant braves the night to keep tossing logs on the fire, you wake shivering at dawn. The tapestries are meant to insulate, but you can practically hear the cold whispering through cracks in the stone. And you, pampered in name but not in body, must endure it because complaining doesn't solve the medieval weather system. Here's a quirky tidbit you probably didn't expect. Noble families sometimes kept small dogs not just for companionship, but as bed warmers. Tiny lapdogs tucked beneath the blankets served as furry hot water bottles. Of course, the downside was fleas. So if you picture yourself as this glamorous princess, remember you're sharing your silken sheets with scratching, wriggling roommates. Try drifting back to sleep like that. Then there's the constant noise. Castle's echo. The clang of the guard changing shifts. The creak of wooden doors. The low hum of prayers from the private chapel downstairs. It all filters into your supposedly private sanctuary, and don't even think about sleeping in after sunrise. Your schedule is dictated not by your body but by the ringing of bells and the shuffle of servants. You're on display even in your nightgown. The irony is that, despite the grandeur of your surroundings, you are as trapped as any peasant in their mud hut. The heavy oak doors lock from the outside at night, partly for your safety, partly to keep you in place. You're a living piece of your father's political chessboard, and this stone chamber is both your bedroom and your gilded cage. And yet there's beauty here too. Morning light, when it does filter through, hits the gold thread of your tapestries and makes the beast stitched into them seem alive. A servant might open the shutters, and for a fleeting moment you catch the smell of wet grass, the distant cough crows, or the faint toll of the village bell outside the walls. It's a reminder that there's a whole world beyond these stone towers, and you're not entirely cut off, even if your life is scripted by duty. By the time your blankets are stripped, your body's goosebumps have fully risen. The room may be chilly, but your day has already begun, whether you're ready or not. And as you shuffle upright on your feather bed, blinking against the smoky light of candles, you can't help but feel that strange tension of medieval princesshood. Everything looks magnificent on the outside, yet the lived reality is drafty, itchy, noisy, and inescapably human. The first thing you notice after dragging yourself out of bed is that you don't actually get to do much on your own. Before you've even rubbed the sleep from your eyes, your chamber is bustling with movement. Maids scurrying about with basins of steaming water, footstools dragged closer to your bed, fresh linens folded with careful precision. Privacy, forget it. Your body, your clothing, your hair. Every part of you is practically a group project. One maid kneels to slip soft leather slippers onto your chilled feet, while another holds up a silver basin so you can wash your face. The water smells faintly of herbs, rosemary perhaps, though it's more about masking the staleness than actual hygiene. Full baths are rare, too risky for delicate constitutions, so these morning rituals of splashing and wiping are the closest you'll get to feeling clean most days. And you had better look cheerful about it, because how you present yourself is considered a reflection of your entire family dignity. Getting dressed is a full operation. Layers upon layers are pulled from cedar chests and laid across chairs. Linen shift, woolen kirtle, embroidered overdress, and maybe a fur-lined mantle if the season demands it. By the time you're cinched in, you're not just a person. You're a walking display of fabrics imported from half of Europe. Each thread whispers your father's wealth and alliances. And yes, it's beautiful, but it's also suffocating. The tight laces pinch, the collars chafe, and you can forget about any quick trips to the chamber pot without assistance. Mainstream fact time. A noblewoman's dressing routine could easily take an hour or more, especially on formal days when jewelry, headdresses, and even perfumes were involved. About the process was deliberately slow because it reinforced your status. The peasants outside the castle walls might throw on a tunic in 60 seconds flat, but you, princess of this realm, have to be unwrapped and rewrapped like a ceremonial object every single morning. And here's a quirky detail. Some noble ladies had their hair literally braided around wires to create impossible-looking shapes, like miniature architectural towers balanced on their heads. Imagine trying to lean back in a chair with that happening. It's the medieval version of beauty is pain, except instead of high heels you've got your scalp being tugged into submission. The servants themselves are a curious mix of invisibility and intimacy. They're not supposed to chatter idly, but you hear their whispers anyway. One coughs, another stifles a laugh, and you know they see more of your unguarded life than anyone else. Historians still argue whether these women, who practically knew your body better than you did, held any real influence in shaping noble decisions. Did they subtly guide conversations, slip in suggestions about who was kind or cruel at court? Or were they just silent shadows, hands always busy but voices erased from history? As the layers tighten, you're reminded of your role as both individual and symbol. A princess isn't allowed to be wrinkled or sluggish or out of sorts. By the time your veil is pinned into place and your slippers adjusted, you're not simply ready for breakfast. You're ready to be seen, even if it's only by your father's steward or the watchful priest who never seems to miss a chance to frown at your posture. And let's not pretend it's all glamour. Sometimes the wool itches so badly you wonder if scratching your leg raw would be more dignified than enduring it. Sometimes a poorly tied girdle digs into your ribs, leaving you lightheaded through morning prayers. And every now and then, you're standing there with arms raised while three women argue about whether the blue gown or the green gown sends the right political message. You're basically a fashion mannequin that sighs and occasionally protests. But here, where the gentle sarcasm comes in, sure, modern influencers complain about needing a glam squad for a photo shoot, but at least they can fire theirs. You're stuck with Cousin Marjorie, the hair puller, until death or marriage do you part. And as the final clasp clicks shut, you straighten, exhale carefully against the corset squeeze, and step toward the day ahead. The chamber doors creak open, light spills in, and the castle seems to hold its breath as you prepare to parade into the corridors. You may not have chosen this life, but now that you're dressed, you are undeniably its centerpiece, silk, fur, and all. By the time you leave your chamber, the day is already mapped out for you. No lazy wandering or spontaneous adventures. Instead, you're ushered straight toward your lessons, which is basically medieval code for a never-ending cram session. Forget the fairy tale image of you drifting through rose gardens with a lute. The reality is a schedule tighter than a modern prep school, minus the option to quit. Your tutors are waiting in a chilly chamber lined with books chained to the shelves. And no, that's not a metaphor. The manuscripts are literally locked down so nobody sneaks them away. One tutor, a gray-robed cleric with ink-stained fingers, clears his throat and points you to a wooden stool. His job? Drill you in Latin, scripture, and moral philosophy. Because what a princess without the ability to recite psalms with perfect pronunciation while your mind is desperately elsewhere. Mainstream historical fact: noble girls, especially princesses, often receive surprisingly thorough educations, sometimes better than their brothers if political marriages required it. Queens like Elena of Aquitaine or Isabella of Castile were multilingual, sharp-witted, and skilled at running estates. The stereotype of the helpless, empty-headed princess?
Pure MYTH.
Your tutors are determined to hammer the same skills into you. Reading, writing, managing accounts, maybe even a touch of law or diplomacy. But here, the reality check. Latin declensions are boring, no matter how important they are. Your eyelids droop as the tutor recites another passage from Augustine, and you secretly wonder whether it's worth getting scolded if you doodle a knight in the margins. Of course, the ink is expensive, so you don't. The morning rolls on with another instructor sweeping in, a woman this time, tasked with ensuring you don't behave like a farmhand at meals. She teaches you how to sit with your shoulders back, how to lift a goblet without sloshing wine, and how to lower your eyes in just the right angle of demure interest. Imagine living in a world where blink speed could be a diplomatic weapon. Honestly, it makes you want to blink twice as fast out of spite. And yet, tucked between the monotony, there are lessons you actually crave. Music, for instance. When a lute is placed in your lap, the strings hum beneath your fingers, and for a moment you forget the weight of expectation. Or when your falconry master sneaks in stories of the hunting field, your heart races at the thought of fresh air and galloping hooves. These fragments of freedom remind you that life is more than Latin verbs and dinner etiquette. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some noble children were trained to compose little riddles or verses in French, Latin, or their local tongue. Imagine the medieval version of TikTok challenges, except instead of dance trends. You're competing over who can slip the cheekiest rhyme into their poetry without getting in trouble. Historians still argue whether these playful exercises were just harmless courtly games or subtle ways for children to practice diplomacy in coded language. Of course, you don't get to choose how much fun you're allowed. If the priest decides you too fond of jesting, you be marched back to the Psalter for another round of stern recitation, and heaven forbid you question a lesson, ask why women can inherit lands in the same way as men, and you get a lecture about natural order longer than your entire reading list. Your tutors, though strict, are also nervous. They know that one day you might be a queen, and they'll be judged on how well they molded you. So every curtsy, every Latin phrase, every carefully memorized genealogy of European houses, it all piles up, not just in your mind but in your body, shaping you into the tool of politics your family needs. And still, when the lessons drag on past noon, your thoughts wander. You imagine being outside in the stables, hair loose in the wind, galloping until the castle towers vanish behind you. You imagine throwing Augustine's home into the fire and replacing it with a bawdy song from the kitchens. You imagine, forbidden thought, that maybe you were meant for more than just absorbing every instruction given to you. But imagination only goes so far. The bell tolls, your tutor closes the book with a thump, and you're dismissed to your next duty. You rise, legs stiff from the wooden stool, veils slightly crooked, and shuffle toward another chamber. And as you do, you can't shake the sense that you're living two lives at once. The obedient princess absorbing lessons on Latin declensions, and the restless girl staring out the window at the freedom she may never taste. By the time lessons are finished, your stomach is already protesting, and you're herded toward the great hall. Eating, for a medieval princess, isn't just about filling your belly, it's another stage performance. The hall is cavernous, its stone walls echoing with footsteps and the faint smoke of last night's fire clinging to the rafters. A long wooden table stretches beneath banners and tapestries, and though it looks grand, you know that under the glittering surface there are always drafts, splinters, and the occasional rat darting along the shadows. Meals are ceremonial. Your father's seat looms at the head of the table like a throne in its own right, and you sit according to rank, never by preference. If your betrothed or some visiting noble is present, your chair may be shifted as a subtle statement of alliance or favor. Every plate, every position, every goblet is more political than you ever admit, and all you want really is to get through the day without spilling gravy down your brocade sleeve. The food arrives in courses platters carried by servants who bow so low you wonder if they'll topple over. Forget the fantasy of golden roast swans, though. Yes, sometimes swan really was served. More often you're looking at hearty bread trenchers soaked with thick stews, roasted meats carved before the table, and a parade of pies stuffed with spiced fish or rabbit. Salt is precious, honey sweeter than gold, and ale the safest thing to drink, because the water will probably make you sick. Mainstream fact: in noble households, watered-down wine and ale were served at nearly every meal, even to children. It wasn't about getting tipsy. It was about avoiding waterborne diseases. So if you're imagining yourself sipping dainty spring water from a crystal goblet, sorry. Your reality is a mug of lukewarm, slightly sour ale that you pretend to enjoy. Here's a quirky tidbit. Bread trenchers used as plates often doubled as dog food after the meal. Once you'd finished your stew, the soggy bread would be tossed to the castle hounds, or sometimes given to the poor waiting at the gates. So yes, you might be eating off what amounts to tomorrow's leftovers for the courtyard beggars. Very eco-friendly. The etiquette is suffocating. You're reminded to tear bread with your fingers, not bite into a whole loaf. You must dab your lips delicately, not wipe them. And heaven forbid you lick your fingers, even if honey drips right onto your knuckles. Everyone is watching. Your every movement is a reflection not just of yourself, but of your family. Historians still argue whether this obsessive focus on table manners was more about instilling discipline or about reinforcing the rigid hierarchy of the court. Either way, you feel the weight of it with every bite. And then there's the music. Minstrels often play in the corner, their tunes echoing off the stone. You'd think it would be charming, but after your third course of venison while a lute twangs out the same 5 chords, the novelty wears thin. Sometimes you catch yourself mouthing along to the words of a bawdy tavern song you overheard in the kitchens once. Definitely not princess appropriate. If only you could request a playlist like in the modern world. Alexa, something other than another ballad about St. George. The irony. While you're trying to balance all this food, etiquette, conversation, your younger siblings might be sneaking scraps to the dogs, or a cousin might belch loud enough to earn a scolding. And somehow, you're the one who'll get blamed if the family doesn't look dignified. That's the price of being the jewel in the crown. You shine or you tarnish, and there's no in-between. By the time the final platter is cleared and the hall begins to empty, your head feels heavy, not from wine but from performance. You rise carefully, your gown threatening to trip you at every step, and smile in a way that hides how much you'd rather be eating hunks of bread in the kitchen with the servants. But you don't get that choice. You glide, you nod, you act the part. Because even at the dining table, your life is less about appetite and more about duty. After the formality of meals, your body craves movement. Unfortunately, movement in your world doesn't mean jogging through the castle courtyard in leggings. It means the careful, choreographed amusements considered suitable for a princess. Pastimes meant to refine your manners, showcase your talents, and, let's be honest, keep you safely occupied so you don't wander into trouble. You're escorted to a solar, the sunlit room reserved for noble ladies. where the air smells faintly of beeswax polish and warm wool. Here, entertainment is both duty and display. Embroidery frames are already propped against cushions, spools of colored thread spilling across the table. You pick up your needle, trying not to sigh, and begin stitching yet another pious scene. Perhaps St. George skewering his dragon, or the Virgin Mary with her serene, impossible smile. Every stab of the needle is slow, deliberate, and very much on display to the watching eyes of servants and companions. The truth is, embroidery is less about art and more about patience. Mainstream fact: noble women were expected to decorate clothing, altar cloths, or even banners with their work, and surviving medieval tapestries show just how skilled they could be. But in your case, this is also political training. Every stitch is proof that you are industrious, obedient, and useful in the symbolic labor of the household, but honestly, it boring, your fingers ache, your back stiffens, and you painfully aware that you'll never win fame for perfect cross-stitching. You glance at the lute lying nearby and silently beg for a turn. When your instructor finally allows it, you pluck the strings into a gentle tune, filling the solar with something more alive than thread. Music is a reprieve. You can almost imagine yourself as a traveling minstrel, free to wander from village to village, singing for coins and never once being forced into a girdle. Quirky tidbit: medieval noble families sometimes played games of courtly love, where knights and ladies exchanged riddles or playful verses pretending at romance. It was basically medieval role-play, half serious and half entertainment. Some of these verses survive in manuscripts, flirty, sly, sometimes scandalous enough to make even a TikTok comment section blush. Of course, your participation is carefully monitored. Too much enthusiasm and you'll be lectured about modesty. Too little and you'll be scolded for lacking grace. There's no winning, only balancing. Then there's chess. Oh, chess. The game arrives on a polished board of carved ivory, the pieces gleaming. At first, you perk up, finally something strategic, something with a hint of challenge. But soon enough, you realize even this has its trap. Your tutor reminds you that each piece carries symbolic lessons. The king moves slowly, the queen freely, the pawns must sacrifice themselves for the greater good. A not-so-subtle metaphor for your own existence. Historians still argue whether noble girls were encouraged to play chess purely for amusement, or if it was meant as a miniature rehearsal for politics, teaching you the art of subtle maneuvering. Still, there are stolen joys. Watching the knights training in the yard below, you can't help but smirk when one tumbles clumsily from his horse, armor clattering like a dropped cooking pot. You giggle behind your hand, the sound sharp in the hushed solar, and your companion nudges you with a look that says, "Careful, someone always notices." But the moment feels worth it, a tiny rebellion against the endless seriousness of your station. You're tethered to the solar, to your chessboard, to your lute. And so your afternoon drifts by, measured in stitches, notes, and half-hearted chess strategies. Entertainment for you isn't about joy. It's about cultivating patience, practicing refinement, and proving you can endure a life where even play is political. You press the final stitch into place, strum a fatting chord, and glance out the window again at the knights in the yard. Somewhere in your chest, a spark of longing stirs. A reminder that you were born to a stage where every game is serious, every pastime of performance and freedom, real freedom, is always just out of reach. By late afternoon, when the shadows stretch long across the courtyard, the castle corridors seem quieter. But for you, the stillness is deceptive, because this is when the subject you secretly dread always comes creeping back. Marriage. From the moment you were born, your hand has been less about romance and more about leverage. To the court, you are not a daughter so much as a living treaty, a human bridge between dynasties. The suitors' names are whispered over maps, their family trees debated like horse pedigrees. You don't choose them, they're chosen for you. And while your heart might long for the stable boy with hay in his hair, your future is being brokered in candlelit chambers by men comparing titles and acres. Mainstream fact: royal marriages in the Middle Ages were often arranged when the bride and groom were still children. Betrothals could be decided before you could even walk steadily, your future sealed with a scribble of ink on parchment. Sometimes brides were married off at 12 or 13, moved to foreign courts where the language, the food, and the customs were all strange. Historians still argue whether these young brides held any private agency, did some resist, bargain, or maneuver, or were most simply swept along by family duty. And here comes the quirky tidbit: some marriage contracts actually included bizarre clauses like the number of castles or hunting dogs a princess would bring into the union. Imagine your entire worth summarized in a list that reads: 1 daughter, 2 dowries, 3 falcons, and 4 fine gowns. Romantic. Right? Your tutors and ladies in waiting drop hints constantly. They remind you that your smile must be practiced, your manner graceful, your knowledge broad enough to charm a foreign king. One might casually mention that your embroidery could make a fine wedding gift. Another sighs over how your French accent will need polishing. Just in case. The message is clear. Your identity is incomplete until you're paired off. And the suitors, oh, they're a mixed bag. Some are gray-haired men who could be your grandfathers. Their teeth few, their appetites large. Others are young but spoiled, strutting like peacocks in velvet doublets, convinced they are God's gift to the realm. A few you've never even met, though their portraits, flat, expressionless, painted by a court artist, hang in your father's chamber as though they were trading cards. You know what the real kicker is? While knights sing ballads of love under balconies in romances, your reality is more like a tense auction. Who offers the best alliance? Which union secures borders, wealth, or claims? You, the princess, are the prize but also the pawn. And deep down, you can't shake the bitter thought: no one is asking what you want. Still, you're not entirely helpless. You learn to maneuver in whispers, to use small rebellions. A slow curtsy here, a sharp glance there, a sudden headache when the suitor is particularly insufferable. You've heard stories, perhaps apocryphal, of princesses who delayed marriages for years through feigned illness or carefully timed stubbornness. Whether they're true or not, you cling to them like fairy tales of your own. Yet even as you dream of escape, the pressure mounts. At feasts, someone inevitably raises the question of when you'll be wed. Courtiers gossip, weighing your worth against other noble daughters. Your name is not yours anymore. It's currency, bartered and speculated upon like silver. And though you keep your head bowed, your ears burn with every whisper. So when night falls and you crawl into your cold bed, your thoughts aren't just of candles, smoke, and drafty chambers. They're of a faceless husband in some distant land, waiting for you like a sentence you haven't yet served. You imagine the clatter of hooves that will one day carry you away from your childhood home, across muddy roads to a strange castle. And you wonder, will you be happy? Or will your life be swallowed whole by alliances, dowries, and duty? Either way, the truth is sobering. Your heart is not your own, and your future is already being written in rooms you're not even allowed to enter. Evening bells chime softly, and you're shepherded not to a garden stroll or cozy chamber, but to the chapel. Faith saturates your life like the damp in the castle walls, inescapable, clinging, and woven into every decision. As a medieval princess, you breathe religion the way you breathe the smoke-filled air, sometimes without even realizing it. You kneel on the hard stone floor, the chill creeping through your gown, and clasp your hands while the priest's voice drones Latin prayers. Maybe you understand every word, maybe you only catch fragments, but you know one thing for certain: God is always watching, and so is everyone else. Mainstream fact: religion structured medieval time itself. Bells marked hours for prayer, meals, work, and rest. For nobility, the chapel wasn't just a place of worship. It was a daily stage where your piety was performed as publicly as your manners in the Great Hall. Your reputation as a good princess hinged as much on your reverent nods as on your lineage. You confessed sins that feel trivial. Perhaps you giggled too much during lessons, or you rolled your eyes when your tutor lectured you on obedience. The priest listens gravely, as if these small rebellions could topple kingdoms. Sometimes the weight of it feels absurd. Sometimes it feels suffocating. And sometimes when you're very still, it feels strangely comforting, like the only space where you're allowed to whisper your real fears without scandal. A quirky tidbit: some noble women were so devout that they collected relics like others collect jewelry. A saint's bone fragment, a scrap of cloth, a vial of supposed holy water, all stored in ornate reliquaries. Imagine your modern friend showing off a limited edition sneaker drop, except here it's someone bragging. This is the toe bone of St. Agnes. Historians still argue whether this intense religiosity was purely belief or also political theater. Was the princess genuinely pious? Or was she performing sanctity because it made her more marriageable, more respectable, less threatening to the men in power? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps you, too, feel both awe and skepticism when the priest lifts the wafer and declares it transformed into Christ's body. The truth is, faith offers you one of the few languages of resistance available. When pressed toward marriage, you can murmur that you feel called to God and by yourself a little time. When pressured into a decision, you can claim your conscience is troubled. It's a delicate shield, but it's something. Yet even as you pray, the irony bites. You're expected to embody chastity and purity while being groomed as the bargaining chip for alliances. One moment you're urged to be like the Virgin Mary, the next you're promised to a duke twice your age. You kneel between contradictions, whispering prayers that are half belief and half desperation. When the chapel service ends, your knees ache and your veil smells faintly of incense. You stand, curtsy toward the altar and file out with the other ladies. Outside, the castle corridors feel darker than before, the torches spitting and crackling. Faith has filled the evening, but instead of peace, you carry away the weight of expectation. Another reminder that your soul, like your body in your marriage, is never entirely your own. Night has barely fallen when a sharp cough from somewhere in the castle echoes through the halls and you feel a shiver of unease. Sickness is never far away in your world. For a medieval princess, health is both a fragile treasure and a constant gamble. No matter how many fur blankets or gilded cups surround you, your morning might begin with a maid checking your complexion. Pale and wan, perfect, fashionable, sun-kissed and rosy, scandalous, too much like a laborer. The irony is that what looks healthy to you now would have been frowned upon in your own castle. Delicate fragility was the ideal, as if constant fainting spells were the surest proof of nobility. Mainstream fact: medieval medicine leaned heavily on the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Illness was thought to come from these fluids being out of balance, so treatment often meant bleeding, purging, or dousing with mixtures that tasted worse than the ailment itself. If you coughed too hard, there was a decent chance someone would suggest leeches. Here's a quirky tidbit. Crocodile dung mixed with honey was once prescribed as a skin treatment in certain medieval texts. Yes, really. Imagine your servants carefully applying that to your already itchy face while swearing it would make you glow like a saint in stained glass. You can almost hear the influencers now. New medieval skincare routine, totally organic. Of course, not all remedies were nonsense. Herbal knowledge did exist, and women in noble households often supervised gardens of sage, rosemary, and lavender used for teas and salves. A warm infusion of chamomile might soothe your stomach, or thyme poultices might ease a cough. Still, you're constantly stuck between the wisdom of herbs and the absurdity of powdered unicorn horns sold by unscrupulous apothecaries. Historians still argue whether medieval royals actually believed in such exotic remedies, or if they simply bought them for the prestige of having something rare. Doctors, when summoned, arrive in fur-trimmed robes with more pomp than actual skill. They sniff your urine in glass flasks, squint, and announce your humors are imbalanced. You nod solemnly, trying not to laugh, because of course they say that no matter the color. Meanwhile, the servants whisper cures behind closed doors, often with more practical sense than the physicians paid in gold. Illness isn't just personal, it's political. A sick princess delays negotiations, sparks rumors of weakness, or raises questions about fertility. Your sneezes ripple outward into diplomacy, making every cough a potential crisis. And while you sip your bitter herbal brew, you can't help but notice the way courtiers' eyes measure you. Healthy enough to be married off, strong enough to bear children, and then there's the ever-present fear of plague. Even inside stone walls, you can't forget the stories. The Black Death that wiped out half of Europe just generations ago, the lingering outbreaks that still flare in towns. One case in the village below can empty the castle halls faster than a banquet servant's vanished doors slam shut. Prayers intensify. You imagine the invisible pestilence lurking on every touch, every breath. Still, there are moments of dark humor. The court physician once insisted you wear a pouch of dried toad parts to ward off illness, tied to your belt like a strange fashion accessory. Another time, a visitor swore by rubbing a dead chicken against plague sores. You wrinkle your nose even thinking about it, but you also file it away as a story to tell your ladies later, just for the horrified giggles. At the end of the day, health is not just biology. It's theater, fear, and constant vigilance. You're caught between herbal gardens and leech jars, between whispered prayers and laughable concoctions. You crawl into bed wondering if the faint ache in your throat is just the cold stone air, or the first sign of something more ominous. The candles are low, the castle corridors hushed, but your world is never silent. Beyond the stone walls lies the estate, the villages, farms, and forests that feed the castle and define your realm. As a medieval princess, you may not plow fields yourself, but the rhythms of peasant life pulse through your existence like a heartbeat you can't ignore. When you step outside the castle gates on procession days, you see it clearly. Rows of villagers bow low, rough hands clutched to their caps. Their lives look impossibly distant from yours, yet you depend on them for every mouthful of bread and every bolt of cloth. Without their labor, your world of silk gowns and gilded goblets would collapse like a stage set stripped of its backdrop. Mainstream fact, most peasants in medieval Europe lived under a feudal system, obligated to work the land of their lords in exchange for protection. The castle wasn't just your home, it was their fortress, their tax office, and their courthouse. You stand at the top of this pyramid visible but strangely disconnected from the sweat that keeps it upright. Still, glimpses of their lives sneak into yours. Harvest festivals brighten the air with music, dancing, and roasted meats. You're expected to smile from your pavilion seat, clapping politely, while secretly envying the freedom of peasants twirling barefoot in the grass. For one night, their laughter seems louder than the endless rules that box you in. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, peasants used to bake symbolic soul cakes and leave them out during All Hallows festivities, hoping to ease the suffering of souls in purgatory. Imagine sneaking one when no one's looking, your modern sweet tooth satisfied by a medieval superstition. Historians still argue whether princesses like you truly sympathized with peasants or viewed them entirely as background. Chroniclers paint you as distant, lofty, untouchable, but scraps of correspondence hint that some noble women did show concern for their subjects, sometimes even interceding when taxes bit too hard. Perhaps you too sometimes whisper to your father or steward, maybe this family could be spared the extra levy this year, and perhaps sometimes you're ignored. Yet you're also reminded constantly of the chasm between your life and theirs. Peasant girls marry young, bear children quickly, and rarely live past 40. You, though bound by politics, eat better, sleep safer, and dream of futures that might stretch into decades. Still, disease, childbirth, and political violence can erase the gap in an instant. No one is truly safe. There are moments when your paths cross more directly. A villager might bring tribute, a basket of eggs, a brace of rabbits, and you thank them with a stiff smile, aware that their family may go hungry to meet this quota. At other times they approach with petitions, land disputes, marriage requests, even accusations of witchcraft. Your role is to listen, nod gravely, and sometimes issue judgments, though the steward usually makes the decisions. And then there's the smell. The villages are earthy, pungent, alive with smoke, livestock, and human sweat. For you, raised in perfumed halls, the stench hits like a blow each time. Yet beneath it lies something real, something grounding. Their cottages may leak, but they are homes built by hands, not arranged marriages. Their lives may be short, but they belong to them. Returning to the castle after such encounters, you feel the stone walls close tighter, the torches flicker, the tapestries smother sound, and you realize that while peasants labor in fields under the open sky, you labor in duties behind gilded bars. Different chains, same weight. The air feels heavier tonight, as if the stone corridors themselves are whispering. You've heard the footsteps, the rustle of skirts in the wrong passage, the way a servant lowers her voice when she sees you. Gossip clings to the castle like ivy, lush, invasive, and impossible to tear away. As a medieval princess, you live in a palace of whispers, and every rumor can shape your fate more sharply than any sword. Your reputation is not your own. Courtiers dissect your every gesture. A smile held too long, a laugh too loud, a glance at the wrong night. By morning, it's been twisted into scandal. If you linger by the window, you're dreaming of escape. If you pray too fervently, you're plotting sainthood to avoid marriage. If you sigh at the supper table, some chamberlain's wife is already muttering that you're heartsick for forbidden love. Mainstream fact: reputation was currency in medieval courts, especially for women. A single rumor could ruin marriage prospects or spark feuds between families. Chroniclers were merciless, and since men wrote the records, women's reputations were especially fragile. Too proud, too pious, too frivolous, too clever. You're always too something. You hear stories of noble women destroyed by gossip, accused of sorcery because they mixed herbs for headaches, or condemned as adulteresses because a knight carried their favor in a tournament. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're warnings. You learn to edit yourself constantly, like someone curating a social media feed centuries before Instagram. Every move must be calculated, aesthetic, and defensible. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some courts, ladies traded love tokens like embroidered sleeves or jeweled pins with knights. It sounds sweet until you realize a misplaced token could ignite weeks of scandal. Imagine the medieval equivalent of someone leaking your DMs. Historians still argue whether gossip in the court was a weapon wielded more by women or by men. Chronicles are filled with queenly intrigues and whispers of female rivalry, but some scholars suggest this was itself propaganda designed to pit women against each other while disguising men's own power plays. Perhaps you, listening in silence, realize that the old steward passing gossip about your daydreaming is far more dangerous than the giggling maid he blames. Yet gossip is not only threat, it's also survival. Information flows fastest in whispers. You learn who favors which faction, which noble is falling out of grace, which guard is disgruntled. A carefully placed word can shield you, distract rivals, or even protect a friend. In this way, you wield gossip as both shield and dagger. But it takes its toll. Even in your own chamber, you lie awake wondering, what version of you is circulating beyond the door tonight? The obedient daughter, the sullen rebel, the flirt, the saint, the fool. You can't control the stories others tell, only the mask you wear when the sun rises. The irony: centuries from now, people will still gossip about you in history books, debating your motives, your loves, your intelligence. They'll never know the whole truth, just fragments, just whispers exactly like the court around you now, and so you move carefully down the corridor, skirts brushing the rushes. Face composed, you nod politely at the servant, say nothing and glide past while behind your back. The whispers begin again, the nights stretch long, and sometimes the whispers shift from politics to shadows, those darker fears you rarely speak aloud, castles or strongholds. Yes, but also echo chambers of superstition. Every draft that rattles a tapestry, every creak of a stair, feels charged with meaning. As a medieval princess, you're expected to be pious and rational, but you know as well as anyone that fear of curses, omens, and unseen spirits slips into every corner of your life. Servants are the first to murmur. A maid swears she saw a candle flame bend toward her when she whispered a forbidden name. A cook tells of a black dog that appeared in the courtyard, eyes glowing like embers, vanishing without a sound. These tiles circulate, tightening around you, and even if you scoff at them, they color your dreams. Mainstream fact: medieval courts were steeped in superstition. People believed in charms against the evil eye and relics of saints to ward off illness, and prayers that could sway storms. You keep such tokens near without question. Perhaps a fragment of bones set in silver claimed to belong to some holy martyr. Whether it works or not, it feels safer to carry it. The real fear, though, comes not from ghosts, but from curses. A rival family might slip a hex into your marriage chest, or a spurned suitor might whisper threats of damnation. Even letters could be dangerous. Some believe that words themselves could carry sorcery, poisoning the reader's fate. So you hesitate before breaking a seal, your fingers trembling over parchment. Here's a quirky tidbit. Crocodile dung was once used in certain protective potions and ointments. Imagine some desperate court physician offering you a paste of that, promising it would guard against evil spirits. You'd nod politely, hold your nose, and pray you're not simply rubbing exotic manure onto your wrist for nothing. Historians still argue whether noblewomen truly practiced secret magic or whether accusations were mostly political tools. Queens and princesses accused of sorcery were often convenient scapegoats for misfortune. If a king fell ill, blame the queen's witchcraft. If a harvest failed, rumors spread of her bathing in moonlight to curse the land. Maybe you've heard those whispers about others, and perhaps you've wondered if one day they'll circle back to you. Nighttime is the worst. You lie in bed, the fire dying low, the air alive with unfamiliar sounds. A shutter bangs, an owl screeches, and suddenly you're convinced the stories are true. You clutch your relic tighter, whisper a prayer, and force yourself to breathe slowly, evenly, like a child pretending to sleep so the monster will pass by. The truth is, whether spirits are real or not doesn't matter. The fear is real. The sense that your life can be undone by forces you can't see, forces no amount of wealth or lineage can shield you from. That's the weight pressing on your chest tonight. And you realize even a princess is never truly safe. Not from men, not from fate, and not from the shadows that creep at the edge of the firelight. Morning comes with the clanging of bells, and once again you're paraded like fine silverware. A medieval princess's most valuable quality, at least to the outside world, isn't her wit or faith or humor. It's her usefulness as a piece on the chessboard of dynasties. You are, above all else, a bargaining chip. Marriages are contracts, carefully inked long before vows are spoken. You sit in a chamber while men in furs and velvet debate your dowry as though you're a prized war horse. How many ships will accompany your hand? How much silver? How many soldiers can your father pledge? You try to keep your face serene, though inside you want to shout. Do I even get to meet the man first? Mainstream fact, dynastic marriages shaped the medieval map of Europe. Queens were not chosen for love but for alliances. Treaties sealed with rings, wars avoided or sometimes triggered by bridal veils. Alina of Aquitaine, Isabella of Castile, Catherine of Aragon, each a queen who altered history not through armies but through marriages arranged at a writing desk. And if the alliance sours, you are expendable. A husband can send you back in disgrace like a faulty product. If you fail to produce heirs, your usefulness collapses. Sometimes daughters are married off before they're even old enough to understand what's happening. Betrothed at 6, shipped abroad at 12, mothers by 15. You remind yourself that at least you've lived long enough to understand the stakes. Here's a quirky tidbit. Wedding feasts sometimes featured subtleties, ornamental dishes shaped into castles, dragons, or scenes of your future kingdom. Imagine sitting at your own wedding table while watching sugar-sculpted figures of you and your new husband being presented to the guests, tiny edible versions of your fate, romantic, in a strangely unnerving way. Historians still argue whether medieval princesses had agency in choosing husbands. Some accounts show women negotiating fiercely for their preferred alliances, while others suggest they were merely carried along like parcels. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between moments of subtle influence disguised under obedience. You learn to master the art of suggestion, planting seeds in your father, ear hopping. He believes they were his ideas all along, but beneath the politics lies the personal. You wonder what the stranger will be like, the man you must share your bed, your crown, your destiny with. Will he be kind, brutal, old enough to be your grandfather? Will you be pawn, partner, or prisoner? And yet you notice a strange calm, because despite the unfairness, despite the fear, there's also the awareness that history is written by such bargains, that your children, if you bear them, may unite kingdoms or tear them apart. You, this weary young woman packing in silk slippers, may change the fate of nations by walking down an aisle. The bells ring louder and you straighten your shoulders. Whatever else, you know one thing. Whether pawn or queen, once you're moved across the board, the game will never be the same. You've heard it since you were old enough to sit still in the chapel. Your most sacred duty is to produce heirs. Not just any children, sons, ideally strong and legitimate, proof that God has blessed your marriage and your dynasty. This expectation rests on your shoulders like a crown made of lead. When the whispers of your betrothal solidify, the lessons shift. Suddenly, older women are sent to prepare you. They tell you about childbearing and hushed voices, laced with both reverence and dread. You learn about fertility charms tucked beneath pillow, about prayers to Saint Margaret, patron saint of childbirth, whose image is often hung over a woman's bed during labor. You pretend to and calmly, but a shiver runs down your spine. Mainstream fact, childbirth in the Middle Ages was perilous. Roughly 1 in 3 women didn't survive it across their lifetimes. Even a princess with access to the best midwives, herbs, and physicians could be felled by fever or hemorrhage. No amount of gold could buy guaranteed safety. And yet the rituals surrounding birth were almost theatrical. The birthing chamber would be sealed, windows shuttered, tapestries hung, candles burning to create a womb-like darkness. Only women, midwives, female relatives, servants were allowed inside. Men waited anxiously beyond the doors, their futures hinging on your survival. Imagine the pressure of knowing dozens, maybe hundreds of courtiers were poised to cheer or grumble depending on whether you birthed a boy or a girl. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some noble women were fed eagle stones, smooth pebbles said to be found in eagle nests, believed to ease labor pains. Did it work? Not likely unless distraction counts as medicine. But you'd cling to anything when the hours drag and the pain makes you cry out to saints you barely remember. Historians still argue whether princesses had any real maternal autonomy. Some sources show mothers fiercely protecting their children's education and futures, while others suggest they were sidelined, their sons whisked away by tutors and fathers almost immediately. You suspect the truth is complicated. A mother might shape her child quietly, through lullabies, bedtime stories, or subtle lessons woven between stitches of embroidery. And then comes the terrifying reality. What if your body fails? A single stillbirth could tarnish your reputation, whispered about in cloisters and banquets. Too many daughters and you're pitted. No children at all and you're cursed as barren. Even queens were cast aside for this. Think of Catherine of Aragon, set aside for Anne Boleyn after years of miscarriages. So you steel yourself. You imagine the chamber thick with incense, your hands clenching rosary beads, the air heavy with sweat and prayers. The midwife's voice blurs as you drift between pain and exhaustion, the fate of kingdoms tightening around your womb. And maybe in that final moment before the child's first cry pierces the silence, you understand why women pass down charms, why prayers are whispered, why saints are invoked. Because for a medieval princess, bringing life into the world is not just survival. It is your legacy, your battlefield, and your most dangerous gamble. The candles have long since burned low, and yet your chamber is never truly dark. There are always footsteps in the hall, voices murmuring outside the door, eyes glancing toward you with unspoken questions. Because as a medieval princess, now perhaps a queen, you're not simply a woman in a gown. You are a political weather vane, your fortunes rising and falling with every gust of power. Court life is a performance, and you expected to play your role flawlessly. One misplaced smile, one overheard whisper can ripple through the corridors like wildfire. Courtiers lean in, eager to interpret every flicker of your expression. Did you look too pleased when that ambassador entered the hall? Too pale when your husband's rival walked by? Suddenly, rumors bloom like mold in damp straw. Mainstream fact, medieval courts were dens of intrigue, where alliances shifted faster than banners in the wind. From the French Valois to the English Plantagenets, from Castile to Aragon, courtiers schemed constantly, eager to climb closer to the throne or push rivals further from it. You learn quickly to mask yourself. Your laugh becomes practiced, your posture deliberate, your words coated in honey. Because one slip could mean accusations of disloyalty, whispers of infidelity, even a charge of treason. A queen consort, after all, was not untouchable. Many were disgraced, imprisoned, or even executed when power shifted. You probably won't survive this unless you master the art of silence. Quirky tidbit: in some courts, ladies-in-waiting were used like spies. They reported your moods, your illnesses, even the tone of your prayers back to those in power. Imagine trying to confide in a friend, only to wonder whether she'd repeat your secrets over wine that night to curry favor. Historians still argue whether princesses and queens wielded true political influence, or if their reputations for intrigue were exaggerated by chroniclers suspicious of powerful women. Some point to figures like Isabella of France, who helped depose her husband Edward II as evidence of female agency. Others argue most royal women were tightly constrained, their power limited to whispers and gestures. You live the paradox firsthand. You are simultaneously unilineously central to the kingdom's fate and yet dangerously peripheral, never secure in your place. And always beneath the gilded surface lies fear. Fear of plague sweeping through the palace, fear of rebellion outside the gates, fear of being cast aside if you fail to produce heirs, or worse, if you produce too many daughters. You smile at feasts, you glide across marble floors, you sit at the center of the table, but inside you wonder, am I queen or am I a beautifully dressed prisoner? Still you learn to carve out small victories, a whispered word that prevents a cruel punishment, a carefully placed dowry that secures an ally, a letter smuggled through a trusted servant that shifts negotiations across borders. Power, for you, is rarely about swords. It's about patience, timing, and never letting anyone see the hand that holds the thread. The bells ring again, echoing through the stone halls. Another day begins. You rise, shoulders back, face serene, and step once more into the dangerous theater of the court. The years blur, and suddenly you are no longer the bright-eyed princess stepping nervously into her first great hall. You are older now, a queen, or perhaps a dowager cloaked in silks that feel heavier than they once did, weighed down by memory more than gold. The corridors echo differently when you walk them. People bow deeper or avoid your gaze altogether, depending on how fortune has treated your family. Your children, if you have them, are now grown or nearly so. Perhaps a son has taken the throne beside your husband, or a daughter has ridden away to another kingdom in a carriage draped with your family banner. You watch them go with both pride and grief, knowing that the same duties once pressed on your shoulders will now press upon theirs. Mainstream fact: royal children were often sent away shockingly young, sometimes at 7 or 8, to foreign courts to begin their political training. Mothers rarely had the comfort of raising their children for long. You recall your little one's hand slipping out of yours, the last glimpse of their face through a carriage window, wondering if fate will ever bring them safely home again. You have grown into your role as a living symbol. When you attend Mass, people don't just see a woman praying, they see the piety of a dynasty. When you stand at the balcony, crowds don't just cheer for your smile. They read omens in how brightly you shine or how pale you look. It is exhausting, and sometimes you long to be invisible, to be simply yourself. But you also understand that invisibility was never an option. A quirky tidbit surfaces here. Some royal widows were believed to possess almost mystical authority, their blessings sought after like relics. Your mere presence could lend legitimacy to new rulers or break the resolve of rebels. Imagine that, the same hands that once trembled with embroidery needles now treated as talismans. Historians still argue whether older queens were sidelined in retirement or if they held subtle but lasting influence over the next generation. Some were cloistered into convents, their voices quieted by stone walls. Others became kingmakers, guiding their sons or grandsons like chess pieces. You know the answer: ISN. Needed shifts with every reign, every marriage, every battle, and so you live with the paradox. You are powerful and powerless, revered and feared, loved and resented. You have been wife, mother, widow, queen, symbol, and shadow. You carry the scars of childbirth, the echoes of courtly whispers, the weight of treaties signed in your name. You have been watched, judged, and remembered. At night, when the palace is finally still and only the torches flicker against the stone, you sometimes allow yourself to imagine a different life, one where you weren't born to crown and duty. Maybe you'd have been a merchant's wife, bustling in a market square, or a nun in a quiet abbey, waking to bells instead of gossip. But history didn't give you that path. Instead, it gave you this one, filled with velvet and fear, diamonds and duty, candles and tears. And tomorrow, when the sun rises and the bells toll again, you will walk the halls once more, a figure painted onto the grand canvas of history. Whether you are remembered as wise, beautiful, cruel, or tragic is not for you to decide. You simply live the role, one breath, one step, one whispered prayer at a time. The halls grow quiet now. The echoes of feasts and councils fade into the distance, and the heavy doors of the great chamber close softly. You are left with the sound of your own breathing, the brush of fabric, as you settle onto the cushioned seat near the window. Outside, the world continues. Horses clatter in the stables, the wind pushes gently at the banners, the faint toll of bells drifts across the darkened city. But here, within these walls, time begins to soften. Your life as a medieval princess, a queen, a woman bound to duty and expectation, has carried you through joys and trials, through whispered schemes and painful goodbyes. Every chamber you have walked, every prayer you have whispered, every child you have carried into the world has left its mark. And though history may record your name as little more than a line in a chronicle, your days were filled with vivid colors, heavy scents, laughter, fear, and the quiet resilience that only those who lived it could ever truly know. Let your shoulders relax now. Let the velvet curtains blur in your mind. The flickering candlelight soften into a gentle glow. The weight of crowns, of duties, of expectations slips away for just a moment. Imagine the hush of the birthing chamber giving way to silence, the constant murmur of courtiers fatting until it is only you, resting at last. You are safe now, tucked into the story as if it were a warm cloak. Nothing more is demanded of you.
Nu vispers, nu triacis, nu airs.
Just stillness, calm, and steady. So close your eyes. Let the past drift into dream, and rest in the quiet comfort of a history that has, for tonight, come to its end. Sweet dreams.